past has been a freelance contributor for Voice of San Diego and many other news outlets, and publishes often on cannabis. She's our resident San Diego cannabis expert, so I'm glad to have her here with the panelists today, and I'll let her introduce them and get us started.
Hi, everybody. Do I need this?
You do.
Okay, I promise. I'll put it over.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. I'm Jackie Bryant, managing editor of San Diego Magazine, but yeah, I've contributed a lot to Voice over the years, primarily cannabis stories, and for the last several years I was primarily a reporter on the cannabis beat, whatever that means, so it could mean a lot of things. So today we're talking about the general landscape of cannabis legality in San Diego, which sounds easy, but like anything dealing with cannabis, it is not. And it means that there's a trillion different variables. So we have Marcus Bush here, a city councilman from National City. We have Laura Wilkinson Sinton, who is a cannabis businesswoman and owns a number of cannabis businesses and is continuing to build her footprint in San Diego County. And then we have Lance Rogers, who's a cannabis attorney, all based here in San Diego. So thank you guys, and welcome. Thank you. So I wanted to start off with giving a little bit of context about where we are in cannabis legalization. I'm sure everybody heard the news about Biden the other day. It doesn't have a lot of immediate effects for anybody on the ground, but it is obviously a historic announcement, and it does set the path for federal legalization or decriminalization or or rescheduling, which is a huge deal. There's a lot that can't be done simply because cannabis is federally illegal. So it's largely symbolic right now, but it will kick, because there are not many federal prisoners in jail for marijuana possession. I think there's like 70 or 90 of them actually, so which is, they didn't announce that. But anyway, so that's largely symbolic. Weed is not actually totally legal yet, but it is technically legal in California, and that happened in full for adult use. Medical was in 1996, Prop 215, and then now, because of Prop 64, which came into law in 2018, it's technically legal for all adults over 21 to buy, sell, and grow and manufacture. So that kind of brings me to my next point, which is that the industry in California isn't really going well. I think it's fair to say, would you guys agree with that? Yes. It depends on what you mean by that, and we can talk about that, but it's good that it's legal, it's good that people are not really going to jail for it anymore, and that's really ultimately, I think, the most important thing. What's not going well is that it is, like anything coming from the dark to the light, it's going to be complicated to get it there. And so we're in the middle of those growing pains, and a lot of operators just simply aren't doing very well. Taxes are very high, they're higher than in other states. And there's a lot of varying regulations because of Prop 64, which implemented a system called local control. And I think personally that local control element is really why this panel exists, because every little jurisdiction is allowed to have their own marijuana rules, and as you can imagine, if one town or city has one rule and it's totally contradictory to something that's next to it, it creates a lot of interesting variables, we'll say that. So I'm going to kick it over to Lance just to sort of give us the overview of local control and Prop 64 and how it's created the legality landscape that we have in San Diego County and the area cities today.
Okay. And first I want to say thank you so much for putting the panel together. Thank you for the work of Marcus, thank you for the work of Laura. It might not be as exciting as listening to people, argue over, the height restrictions and things. It might not be clickbait for the news articles. But what this guy's going to do is going to save the world. Cannabis in South County is going to save the world. And I'll explain my position to you a little bit later as we get into it. But first, I guess, a history lesson. I started as a criminal defense attorney in 2008, and one of the first cases I worked on was People v. Joe Von Jackson. At that time, the district attorney, Bonnie Dumanis, was 100% opposed to anything cannabis, and in concert with federal and state authorities, she was engaged in a war on marijuana in San Diego County. There's interesting reasons for this that I've thought about over the years. We have a really dynamic community We have a lot of military. We have border patrol ringing our community as well as an international border and the ocean. And yet everybody here likes to smoke weed, right? Like, who doesn't like to go to the
I
beach
do,
and get high
personally.
and hang out? I mean, that's awesome. So we had this this conflict, which was really unique in the entire state and possibly the entire country, where you got a lot of people that want to enjoy and smoke weed, with local law enforcement who are at war with marijuana. And so that all, in a sense, culminated with a series of orchestrated raids in 2008, 2009 that were coined Operation Green RX. And I just so happened to become a criminal defense attorney around the same time. Got a call, visited a gentleman by the name of Jovan Jackson out in George Bailey Detention Facility. Was doing DUIs and robberies and these types of things at a time, and sat down. I was like, okay, all right, what's the story? He said, I'm innocent. I was like, oh, okay. This is like the 5th time I've heard that, but okay, go on. So no, I was running a medical collective under Prop 215, SB 420, and I'm innocent. I was like, okay, tell me more. Well, I got 2,000 seriously ill medical cannabis patients who come to me, and I provide them with medicine. I was like, okay, this is getting interesting. Go on. He's like, yeah, I have a nonprofit, and we pay taxes. Okay. So why are you in a jail cell? Well, I'm innocent, and I was targeted. I was discriminated against, and I was like, oh, okay. So it's really difficult to represent innocent people. As a criminal defense attorney, it's way easier to represent, the guilty, because it's just kind of like a mitigation of risk. But we took the first case to trial, won that case, took the second case to appellate court, and made the law in the state of California that you can sell, cannabis. And in a sense, I think Jovan was vindicated. And when you look back at that arrest and all of those efforts, some things strike me when I think about it. There were 22 collectives, dispensaries, targeted in 2008. Of the 22, Jovan was the only one who was charged with, his dispensary was the only one that was charged by Bonnie DeManis. If you looked at the data, the rest of the dispensaries were run by folks who were not African American. When I looked at his particular case, there were multiple people. It wasn't just Jovan running the dispensary. There were lots of folks, in the dispensary, getting cannabis out there. And there were, yes, I would say there were probably around 10 suspects of that investigation. 8 of whom were white, 2 of whom were African American, Jovan and the security guard. And you can probably guess the who got charged. 100% of the African Americans got charged with crimes, and 100% of the white folks working in the dispensary were cooperating witnesses.
I'm shocked.
Yeah.
Shocked, I tell
This
you.
never happens, ever.
First time I've ever heard.
So that kind of, set me on a course to handle cannabis criminal defense cases throughout California for my career. 2011, I represented the first dispensary in the county of San Diego. Okay, so let's get into the history. So, we have this war on marijuana in the county of San Diego. The Board of Supervisors said, oh, we've got a great idea to deal with this. Let's pass an ordinance that is so restrictive that no one could ever get a license. And they did, and everybody was just up in arms. What, are you kidding me? These are going to be in the middle of nowhere, and you have to pay all these fees. I mean, this is a de facto ban. And that's true, it was a de facto ban.
And it's worth saying that this happens in other counties and places in California too.
100%.
San Diego has a reputation because of this war that Bonnie DeManis, started for being particularly strident in that, but this is not the only jurisdiction in California that has legislated this way.
Correct, yeah, and I guess to get to your point too, real quick with regard to local control, every municipality in the city in the state has one of 3 things with regard to local cannabis. An outright ban, on its face, no cannabis anywhere in the city of X. A de facto ban, which is so restrictive that it's impractical or impossible to actually get a license, or a permitting scheme, that actually licenses dispensaries. And you cannot get a state cannabis license without a local permit. We call it dual licensing, okay? So in the county of San Diego, they passed an ordinance, de facto ban essentially. I represented a group that was actually able to find a location, go through the process, work with the San Diego County Sheriff's Department in 2011 and get a dispensary license in 2011. I remember specifically meeting with a member of the Sheriff's Department in the big warehouse that then became, I think it's Outco, out in the county now. At the time it was called Mother Earth Cooperative. And we exchanged numbers, and I said, he said, boy, this is the first time I've stood in a warehouse and not thrown anybody with a bunch of pot growers and haven't arrested anyone. And I said, no, sir, this is the first time I've ever given a cop my cell phone number. You know, we're trying to,
Progress.
you know, we're trying to, you know, move things along. Got involved in, you know, in sort of advocacy efforts from then, and joined a, you know, so there's this transition from, you know, cannabis being a movement to an industry, and sometimes there's a lot of tension with that as well, which we could probably get into. Certainly still a movement because it's illegal under federal law, and there are hundreds of cities throughout California that prohibit this activity. But I mean, again, focusing on the county of San Diego, worked with the city of San Diego in 2016, I want to say. And worked with the first dispensary that was licensed through the city called a Green Alternative down in Otay Mesa. It was an incredibly competitive land use process where, you know, folks were it was a knife fight, you know, like everybody was playing all sorts of, you know, zoning and litigation games to try and get the first one to get this golden ticket, which is worth millions.
And that's also very common, right? That's common across the state. That's I always joke that whenever I meet a land use attorney, I'm always like, "You have cannabis clients, don't you?" And he's like, "How did you know?" It's kind of become the de facto vehicle
But it doesn't have to
litigating
be.
these battles. No, it doesn't have to be,
It should be.
but it is.
Yeah, we could talk about stories, but I don't want to take too much of the time. So, City of San Diego, then worked with the City of Chula Vista a couple of years ago, representing Grasshopper Dispensary, which is a fantastic, you know, South County-based, locally owned dispensary. Worked with a cultivator who received a cultivation license in the city of Oceanside, which is great. And so, you know, slowly, cities are starting to come along. I'm looking forward to when the city of Coronado opens its first dispensary.
Yeah, that'll happen soon, right?
Yeah, Laura's going to announce her candidacy for mayor.
Change those laws.
So anyway, that's just a little bit about me, a little bit about San Diego, and you know, I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yeah, that's great context. Thank you. So to that point, everything's a little bit different. It's legal in the city of San Diego. There are a number of dispensaries. Do we know off the top of it? There's 20.
I believe there's 28 at this
Right, I
point.
was gonna say 25 to 28.
There's
licenses.
36 available permits, but some of them aren't being used actively.
Got it. Okay, so there you go. There are 28 licenses currently active and open storefronts.
And if
I
I,
don't know.
if I could punctuate, you know.
Cultivation licenses, there are a number issued, but many of them in manufacturing are not actually in use. So this happened a couple of years ago. There was a manufacturing tax in the city that got amended, but it was considered to be very high for a while. And due to that and a number of other factors, a lot of people who were growing in manufacturing here in San Diego actually left. There was a decent exodus from here up to the Bay Area around when 64 came into effect. So that is being made up for, the difference of that in other cities slowly, and I think manufacturers in some measure are coming back, but we kind of lost the initial wave of that in San Diego County because of that tax and a few other restrictions.
On Prop 64, one of the promises of Prop 64 was access, patient access. And that is
We're not just
something.
patients, access for everybody.
Yeah, access for everybody, the adult use. And where San Diego County has lagged most of California and certainly all of the states that have legalized is allowing for that access. I know in the city of San Diego, the zoning is so restrictive, and these are retail outlets. They should be in retail locations. If you go to San Francisco, you'll see a Stizzy right there on Market Square. But they hide them and make them inaccessible and car dependent, which is, it's the opposite of access. They make it difficult to find, and it becomes a land use play instead of just opening a retail store like it is in so many other places. I learned the business in Bend, Oregon in 2015, and excuse me, up in Bend, currently there are 40 dispensaries in a town of 100,000. Now, if San Diego County had that same ratio, we would have 5,500 plus dispensaries here. And it would not be a big deal. You know, in other locations, California has really restricted this in so many ways, and then you add the additional layer of cities on top of it. So you have regulation and you have taxation. Wana gummies is the nation's most popular THC gummy. It has left the state of California because the regulatory. Pardon me? Crystal Labs pulled out too. So what you're having here is this overtaxation and this overregulation of the few that you even allow in the door. And one of the challenges we have is, and my personal, it's anecdotal, but I'm sure there's research we could commission to figure this out. San Diego is a border county, and for 30 years, local news has pounded about evil cannabis cartels. You know, the racism plays into that, all of that plays into it. So now we have people who are reticent to do it because, you know, it's drugs. Well, I will remind you that no one has ever died from THC or cannabis overdose ever, and that information is on the DEA's own website. So we're hoping it'll pull off of Schedule 1 this year. But really, the lack of access is driving this same black market. It's the reason there are illegal grows using illegal poisons in our very county right now on federal lands and state lands when they can get to it. So allowing for that access and opening it up will cure a lot of these ills. But you know, this is not plutonium that we're regulating here. This is a weed that grows in the ground that has been used for millennia for medicinal purposes and for recreational purposes. And I am still so frustrated by the red tape, by all of the regulations and the taxation issues. Many of you are familiar that Chula Vista has, I believe, 8 dispensaries that are adult use dispensaries and a couple of deliveries as well. And I just won my court case. It took 3.5 years to sue the state of Chula Vista because they didn't even follow their own ordinance. So when you
heard about that for Voice, you can find the details in there.
Yeah, the Virginia actually do it in Voice of Sandy. And you know, not everybody has the wherewithal or the funds to be able to do that. If you have a social equity candidate who wants to open a shop, they're not going to be able to challenge a big city, and the big cities know it. So, you know, this is one of the challenges as we open up. Now, the other element of this is cities are getting a taste of the money. They look at Desert Hot Springs over in the desert. You know, their city hall was in a trailer, and they opened up to, when medical cannabis became legal, they threw open their doors and said, come to Desert Hot Springs. And they did enforce, and now they have a thriving arts program. They have a LEED certified city hall that I think is probably finished. I mean, they have public monies that they didn't have before for their general fund. So I think that's what's forcing the city of Santee and many of the cities throughout the county to take a look at what's possible here. But as the county gets their regulatory construct together, I would implore the county of San Diego to look to the state of New York, who is giving their first 200 licenses to people who have actually been arrested and incarcerated in the war on drugs for cannabis. I think New York State is leading the way, because the fact of the matter is right now, it's a lot of rich people and rich corporations, even publicly traded Canadian corporations, that are coming in and doing this. And if you want true social equity, you can't just say, okay, well, we'll give you this little program and here's a little capital. These people have been punished for decades. They can't get student loans, many of them couldn't get jobs, and to be able to find access to the capital that's required to either buy or lease a place and have the wherewithal to get through all of the regulations and everything else, you know, you've got to give them a hand up. You just can't give them a handout. You've got to give them a little bit of a head start so they can establish their businesses and grow this multi-generational wealth that other people are having just by walking in the door with enough money. So.
Thank you, Laura. So to that point, various places have limited access in various ways or opened it up. And one city that has opened it up and in a way that I think is significant for anywhere in California, certainly for the country, and notable in San Diego County is National City. So National City passed its cannabis ordinance in spring 2021, is that correct?
Yes.
May 2021, I believe, and they're actually going to have consumption lounges, which is so hotly contested all over the country, all over the state. It's very hard for them to get implemented because people are like, okay, sure, you can grow and sell weed, I guess, and people can smoke it in their own homes, like whatever, do what you want to do. But people get freaked out, especially voters, when they hear that there's going to be like a weed bar in their neighborhood. And I get how that feels on its face, right? But then when you think about it, actually like a bar with alcohol and actually, you know, who's going to smoke weed and then starting a fight? Pretty much nobody. So it is actually a very, I think personally, these are my personal views, I think it's a very good way to implement cannabis legality because you're actually serving it and selling it to people in a controlled setting that the bud tender can limit people's consumption. It's actually, I think, a boon for public health. And it's very hard to get that implemented, as I mentioned, but National City's doing it, so Marcus, why don't you tell us about that? And if you could give a little color on how this came to be and any tension that may have come up, because I'm sure there was some.
Yeah, well, I love color. I'm a colorful guy, so happy to do that. So no, just it's an honor to be here. So I appreciate what San Diego putting this on and everyone in the audience. So just some background on myself. I am a cannabis user, and I think that's really important to say to break the stigma that still exists, especially you know, against Black and brown folks. I'm Black, skin, Afro-Latino, and so I use it. My wife uses it. Not currently because she's pregnant, but she, you know, when she's not pregnant, she uses it. My mom, my friends and family, and so I'd say that we need to repeat that and break that stigma because that's part of what drives these over-regulations, these restrictions, the over-policing, is that stigma. So it's going to take some time, but I think we all need to move forward doing that. And so for me, from a policy standpoint, so I first got involved when I was a planning commissioner, and I actually served as planning commission chair in 2015 for the city of National City. And that was at a time, and you guys probably have to help me, there was a law that was passed that gave this trigger period where if cities didn't ban it or allow regulation, that it shut down. And that was in, I think the deadline was 2015, right? Do you guys remember that? You don't know what I'm talking about?
Well, Prop 64.
That was part of 64.
It's part of 64.
Yeah. And the same thing is actually currently happening in New York. It's either you buy in now or you buy in now and you're in forever, but if you don't, you can do it later. They actually did it the inverse, but yeah, it's a common provision.
So so that was back in, well, at least when it was discussed at the city, the city level, when I was on the planning commission, so you had to, it was that trigger, so we had a period of time whether we allowed it or not, and our city staff, of course, was planning to ban it all, so I took the lead and saying, well, why are we looking at banning it right away? Why don't we look at regulating it? So there's a lot of discussion. It was really controversial, but I think that was in December of 2015. We did pass on the planning commission. We passed a ordinance and that legalized cannabis retail, consumption, and cultivation, and I think manufacturing too. So it didn't matter. It was swiftly rejected by City Council at the time, unanimously too. And it's unfortunate because you know it passed 4-3 on Planning Commission. But imagine where we would be a national city with more revenue, with more access. But our leadership at the time didn't see that. I'm glad that now we're kind of taking more steps. You see that with the lounge, as you said. So even though we were behind on the land use part of it, I think we got more ahead. We're the first in the county to do the lounge. The lounge is important. It's the first in the county. It's very controversial. Every council meeting we have those group activists. Laura knows them very well. That Becky and a few other people, I can't remember their names, and I appreciate them they're giving a voice, so I appreciate that. So it's definitely controversial, And but I think it's making progress.
Can you expand on why it's controversial? Like, what are people concerned about?
And I have to jump in here only
Go ahead.
because it's literally only 6 people. It is the
That is
same
true.
6 people
Actually.
at every city council. Oh, Zoom is the greatest thing for them. They don't even have to get in their cars and drive. They have an outsized voice. They purport to represent, one of them says he's from, I think it's San Diegans for Safe Neighborhoods. There is no such organization. There's no website. They are not registered at the Secretary of State's office. It is a fake, I mean, they are without portfolio, but they work the refs. And they make it sound like it's controversial at the city council level. Only 8% of Americans in the Pew Research that just came out think cannabis should be illegal at this point in the whole United States. So it's not controversial, but they're as we've seen, they drum up controversy at every city council meeting. He has to sit through it.
And Voices Jesse Marks wrote about these people actually a few years ago, so if you want to go back in the archives, there is definitely some literature on this tradition in San Diego.
Can I explain how National City is going to change the world real quick?
Please,
Of
course, that's
I
my
know,
superlative.
I know a little bit about this controversy because I've been dealing with it my entire career, and I know these people. They show up all the time, and the challenge with these people is, as you said, they represent such a minority of folks that it's kind of like, do you even give them the time, because the legalization train has left the station. It's normal to be a cannabis user. It's normal to participate in the cannabis movement or the cannabis industry. It's a little odd to listen to people oppose the use and consumption of this plant. But there's a long history about where those folks come from, as dating back to the 20s and reefer madness. If you read, The Emperor Has No Clothes by Jack Herrera, goes into the whole history there. And in my career, it's been really fascinating because if you do, interact with people over 60, 65, they are ingrained with this subconscious fear of marijuana, cannabis, because there was a large propaganda campaign during that time period. You could just watch Reefer Madness and look how crazy it is, but it was perpetuated, and even when you talk about it, it sounds a little crazy, but there's evidence there that I could put forth in court about how it was propagated to advance the hemp and cotton industry, because they didn't want to compete with to advance the cotton industry, nylon, other textiles, because they didn't want to compete with hemp.
And also they wanted to protect the timber industry because they saw cultivation of hemp or cannabis
Correct.
could actually go against that. And so it was William Randolph Hearst, the newspaper Titan, was actually involved with that effort with the federal government to quietly crush marijuana.
So since 2018, we have created a multi-billion-dollar hemp industry in the United States. It's a brand new industry. We are leaders in hemp in hemp now, thanks to the efforts of folks that have worked on cannabis and then worked on hemp. But going back to National City and consumption lounges, currently we all live in our own little bubbles. We're on the internet and we're like, friend, whatever. And especially because that was a part of COVID too, right? Like, so as we're coming out of COVID, we're having more of these things. People have their own, sense of comfort about that. I want to be around people, maybe I should wear a mask, maybe I don't wear a mask. And so, the more that we can create space for people to have a conversation that's not on the internet, the better. And a cannabis lounge is a place where folks of all walks of life are going to go and smoke a joint with each other, take a hit on the vape pen, eat an edible, and have whatever conversation they want. And there's a ton of scientific data about how the endocannabinoid system, when it creates these connections, it makes people a little bit elevated in their thinking. So that's why I understand. I understand that is a big loaded statement that National City is going to change the world, but that's my argument for why it's going to.
No, I agree with this, and it's also worth pointing out exactly to that point that cannabis culture and cannabis consumption and use has been completely privatized because of its illegality. So there's just, unless you're willing to forego that and go to underground events that have been happening, in California, especially for years with 215, and you're part of that culture. Most people aren't part of that culture and don't have access to it. And so this is the first time that people will actually be able to consume in public with people they don't know or like-minded people. It's actually, I get kind of emotional about it. It's because you forget that this is in the shadows and that you do this privately, and that it is seemingly such, it's just smoking weed or consuming weed, but it is a big part of a lot of people's lives, and in a way that drinking or doing other things is. And so, and there's obviously a strong agricultural element. Oh my God, there's so much. So, I agree. I think it's a big deal.
I do think it can in a way change the world. We all can change our world, the ripple effects, in our way. And so in National City, at least for the county, so us being ahead of the game on this, it is I think scary to a lot of people, right, and even residents, because we all sometimes have this fear of the unknown, and so we're the first doing it, but not in the state, right? And so I think West Hollywood, I think San Francisco has some. I'd like to visit still. The desert.
Yeah.
So they exist, and it shouldn't be this radical thing if we think about it, because we accept alcohol. It is a fact that alcohol is much more dangerous than cannabis. It's just a fact. And if you think about it, just like from my just experience, like who would you rather? What is a less dangerous situation? Is it a bunch of people in a bar that have been drinking? Like where is the possibility for more violence, right? Is it with a bunch of people drinking and getting drunk, and then sometimes like one little thing can set someone off, and then it results in violence? Or compare that to someone who is really high, who is smoking weed. They're chill. They're not necessarily trying to start fights. We all know that from experience.
That's why law enforcement, they'll tell you quietly, there are no cannabis domestic calls. None.
There you go.
Honey, let's order a pizza and hang out on the couch and watch a movie. Let's chill. Yeah. Law enforcement loves that.
And obviously that's not to say, so there's, obviously should be controlled and regulated, right? We don't want folks, we need to protect the public from driving under the influence of cannabis too. So that's dangerous, we need to say that, and that can be done. And that's why in a controlled setting, like a cannabis lounge, it absolutely can be done. It's revenue with the city. And just to give you guys info about what we're doing. So it's still with the application process. My understanding is that there was only one applicant. So, and part of it is because we are really heavy regulating it in the city. So when we did propose it, I wanted it expanded citywide in our mixed-use zones and retail, because I think it should be treated as a retail use. Why are we treating it as anything different than retail? That wasn't where the council was. And so we really restricted it to the west side of National City and these really difficult parcels, in my opinion. However, having said that, I do see the value in that this was kind of almost like a pilot, and now that it's smaller, I'm having concerns, which I'm more than happy to talk later about our social equity policy. I'm concerned about that. And so it's good that we, like social equity, you have to get right on the forefront, not on the back end. So I think with this lounge, it's an opportunity to address that social equity too.
So speaking of social equity, in 1 second.
I just had a quick question.
Yeah.
What is the actual timeline, do you think, of the lounge actually opening?
What's the timeline of the lounge
I
opening?
think late 2023. I think.
Best case
Estimate. Probably with the permitting and the construction. Don't quote me on that.
And just to give a quick aside, what we mentioned earlier about the county and the county's blanket ban, that was still in effect until recently. It's in the process of being overturned and legality implemented in the unincorporated areas of the county. So I did want to make that point, so we know that process is rolling too. But as I understand it, I don't think there's going to be any legal adult use sales or anything like that in the county, at least until some point in 2023 or beyond, right?
Yeah, they had a blanket EIR that they're doing, which actually was good, because you'll save all the growers and all the small people a ton of money. Because
what's that?
The environmental impact report for the county, that'll cover growers, manufacturers, it'll cover all of it. So individual applicants will not have to go to that $150,000 expense of getting an EIR report. So, And that takes 2 years, and that started maybe a year and 9 months ago. So there are 5 that do operate under a grandfathered clause right now, though. But they're in Ramona, they're in various, small, they're clustered in a couple of small rural areas.
Thank you for that. And so social equity